Well, good evening. We are now on with Attorney Joe Kimok, and he is running for Broward County State Attorney. And good evening, sir. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing well, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to stop by the Adams Brothers podcast. And we'll just want to ask you a few questions. So we'll start out by just asking you to introduce yourself and tell us about your education and how you became an attorney and where you work and all that good stuff.
Sure. Thank you again. Thank you so much for having me on. I hope everybody out there is staying safe and healthy. And we this is a very, very difficult time for a lot of folks, but we're 100% going to get through it, and we're going to be better on the other side. My name is Joe Kimok. I am a proud husband to my wife, Jordy, who is a partner at the biggest law firm here in actually the state of Florida. We have two little kids together, Jackson, who is 3, and our newborn Julia, who is 4 months old.
Congratulations.
I am a criminal defense lawyer. I work for a state agency representing folks who can't afford a lawyer. I grew up the proud oldest son of a single mom. We were raised on food stamps and soup kitchens. My mom raised 3 of us on her own. We spent a good portion of my childhood, the 4 of us, living in a 1-room basement in my grandparents' basement. Was lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to college. Went to Florida State University, where I majored in criminology and English literature. And I always knew I wanted to go to law school, but decided to take a few years off to see the real world for a while, and became a teacher. I was a high school English teacher at a low-income inner-city school in Houston, where I taught English as a second language, mostly to new immigrants, mostly to kids actually that had just come from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and kids, who came here with their families wanting a better life. Did that for 3 years. It was the hardest job I've ever had and the most rewarding job I've ever had. Went to Vanderbilt University Law School, graduated in 2010. And when I graduated, I had a lot of options. I had an offer to work at a big international law firm in Washington, D.C. I had an offer for a clerkship in Atlanta. But I went to law school because I wanted my law degree to mean something. I wanted to use it to better my community, to fight for justice. And I thought the best way to do that was to join the prosecutor's office. So I became a prosecutor here in Broward County, and quickly found that I was very much entrenched in a broken system. I started in the juvenile court, where I was prosecuting kids who very much looked and acted and reminded me of the kids that I had taught just a few years earlier. Kept getting promoted up in the office, and kept kind of waiting for the real bad guys to show up, and they never did. And instead, what I found was that I was spending all my time sending mostly black and brown young men to prison for long periods of time for nonviolent offenses. The day my life changed, I was in an airport and I picked up a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which is an outstanding treatise on what mass incarceration is and how we got here, and draws the very literal link from slavery to lynching to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. And she was able to articulate for me everything that I had never really been able to articulate for myself. So within a few months of reading it, I left. I've been a criminal defense lawyer now for the last 6 years. I love it. Represent people on everything from misdemeanors all the way up to homicides, folks charged with the death penalty, folks on death row now. I represent a lot of kids who are direct filed into the adult system. And it's the best job I've ever had. I'm able to help real people and real families. But I know that for every one person I'm able to help, there's 1,000 more behind them that get swallowed up by the system. And that is what has led me to run for state attorney.
Well, you certainly have an impressive resume there that led up to you being an attorney right there. And I heard you speak of black and brown issues, and it'll just lead me right on into my first question for you, sir. And how would you address the issues of black and brown defendants receiving harsher and longer sentences than white defendants who have committed the same crime?
And it's not even just sentences, Daryl. It's every single stage, from the decision of where police decide to put police officers in the street to patrol, to the decision to stop somebody, to the decision to search somebody, to arrest somebody, to hold them pre-trial, to charge them, and then the level of their charge. Black and brown folks are overrepresented in every single part of that system. And so we have a really, really detailed plan on our website, which I'll plug, www.joekimok.com. But there are three parts of it. One, we need to dismantle the systems, the practices that are creating those racial disparities. Practices like cash bail, mandatory minimums, stop and frisk, pretextual vehicle stops where police are just pulling cars over because they look suspicious. All of these things we know drive racial disparities in the system. And yet we continue to allow them to occur. Stop and frisk is particularly egregious, since 90% of the folks that are stopped and searched by police are innocent, are completely innocent, have nothing, doing absolutely nothing wrong. And yet police continue this practice that leads to an extraordinary number of black and brown folks being harassed by police, and then creates a deserved and genuine mistrust of police. And so we dismantle those systems. Second is we have to collect data. Right now, the state attorney's office doesn't collect data or publish data on where those disparities exist. So for example, if we knew that everybody that was arrested for grand theft last year, there was that black folks were getting longer sentences for grand theft, that would enable us to take a different approach to grand theft. But the office doesn't collect that data and doesn't publish it, doesn't make it transparent. And so we not only have to do that, but we got to invite the community in to look at our data themselves, so that they can hold us accountable to doing that. And then third, the office has to reflect the community itself. And so we have to be extraordinarily aggressive in hiring Black lawyers, Hispanic lawyers, women, LGBTQ+, and to me, disabled folks. And to me, the most important one is returning citizens. Folks that have actually gone through the system, that have a certain expertise that can tell us how to fix the system. And so those three things, combined with, implicit bias training and things like that we can continue with, which is important, but to me, implicit bias training isn't going to fix the system. We got to do a lot more.
And that was going to be my follow-up question, or it was going to be about training. So, I mean, you did touch on it. So,
yeah, we certainly need to be a lot more aggressive. There are some great implicit bias training programs out there. Some folks are just explicitly racist, and implicit bias training isn't going to help them. And there's some evidence to suggest that implicit bias training without more isn't enough to change folks' behaviors. But if we combine that implicit bias training with these change in policies, then we certainly can turn this thing around.
Well, the implicit bias training that won't help certain people, how would you deal with those people if they get the training that everybody else has received, and it's clearly showing that they are still biased? How will you handle that?
Fire them. I mean, look, we can no longer allow folks who are either explicitly or implicitly driving the racism within the system to continue to operate in the system. And so, you know, for folks that, and there are folks at that office now that will need to be let go on day one. And then as we continue to monitor folks, you know, moving forward, you know, some folks will have to be shown the door. But at the same time, right, we're recruiting people with like-minded beliefs, folks that, you know, folks out of law school. So many people went to law school to be civil rights lawyers. Well, it's really hard to get a job as a civil rights lawyer right out of law school. But we can change that. When we turn the state attorney's office into an office that that's main focus isn't convictions and sentences, but rather civil rights and the safety of everyone, then we start recruiting a whole bunch of folks that change the culture that make that behavior unacceptable.
Well, thank you for answering that question. I appreciate it. Wayne?
Okay, Joe. Have you ever been disciplined or referred to the Florida Bar Association for a complaint?
No.
Okay, and have anyone, because we asked this question to one of the other candidates, and I don't think they made it sound like we was not fair to them by asking this question. So I'm gonna ask you too. Have anyone in your family or you or anyone in your family made any social media posts that can be construed as, racist or just way out of line?
No.
Okay. And what will you do as Broward County State Attorney that will differentiate you from Michael Sachs?
Oh, goodness. I mean, look, Michael Sachs has been the main driver of mass incarceration for the last 44 years. And so what we have put together is a truly decarceral platform to undo the damage that has been done to our communities. So I'll talk about 3 of those points. One is we're going to end cash bail. So on day one, I will instruct my assistants to no longer ask for cash bail. Cash bail creates 2 systems of justice, one for folks that can afford it, one for those folks who can't. If my loved one is arrested tonight, they will be brought to a judge tomorrow morning, and the judge will literally put a dollar amount on what it will cost my family to get them out of jail. It's legal ransom. If I can afford it, great. If I can't afford it, then they're going to sit in jail weeks, months, sometimes years before the case is resolved. Legally innocent, presumed innocent, and we know a lot of folks, in fact, are innocent. And so the only kind of analysis that should be occurring at that first appearance hearing is the level of dangerousness of this person, not how much money they have in their bank account. So that's one. And then that, right, dramatically decreases our local jail population. Because 86% of folks that are in Broward County jails right now are there pre-trial, and they are presumed innocent. They have been convicted of nothing. And most of those folks are there because they can't afford their bail. So when we end cash bail, we dramatically reduce our local prison population, or local jail population. 2 is we are going to end the war on drugs. So we will not charge possession of marijuana at all, period. Putting somebody in a jail cell for possessing marijuana is immoral, and frankly, it's dangerous, both to the person and to the community. The coffee that I had this morning, or the glass of wine that I'm going to have after my interviews tonight,
Sounds good.
Are worse for me than any marijuana. And so putting people in jail for that is just profoundly immoral. But then also is, we can't, if we're going to end this war on drugs, which is really a war on people, we can't just focus on marijuana. We have to talk about some of these other drugs too. Putting somebody in a jail cell who is suffering from addiction, thinking that that is going to cure the addiction, is like putting somebody in a jail cell who has high cholesterol and thinking that will solve their high cholesterol. Addiction should be treated by experts in the community, not by wardens behind prison bars. And so what we say is that we're going to stop charging folks for possession cases and instead refer them to structured, individualized diversion programs that will help them get the help that they need while keeping convictions and jail stays off of their record. And then third, the third biggest point I would make is we have to revolutionize our juvenile justice system. We are sending kids into that system who are themselves victims of abuse and neglect. We're abusing them and neglecting them in the system, and then we're spitting them back out, either more hardened criminals or injured or dead in some cases. And so we are committed to a couple of things. One is we need to end pretrial detention for kids. Right now we have so many kids who end up, just like the cash bail situation, spending time in a juvenile jail prior to being convicted of anything. Two, we need to end direct file. Florida leads the nation in charging kids as adults because we have this system that allows prosecutors to unilaterally charge kids as adults. And then three, we need to make diversion the rule, not the exception for kids. So there is nothing that we can't do in the community. In fact, in our communities, we are a lot better at helping kids and treating kids than the juvenile justice system is. The juvenile justice system simply makes things worse. And so what we need to do, what we must do, is develop restorative justice programs, mental health programs, substance abuse programs, poverty addressing programs, things that actually address the underlying causes of juvenile crime while keeping them away from kind of the trauma and the abuse of the juvenile system. That's just three of the points. You ask, what would I do different from Michael Sachs? We have a whole list of stuff talking about mandatory minimums, death penalty, plea bargaining up on our website, and I would encourage folks to check it out.
Okay. Did you accept any money from police unions?
No. In fact, I was the only candidate who refused to meet with them when they invited all of us to interview for an endorsement. I was then the first candidate to sign the no cash from cops pledge.
Okay. And how do you feel about the Black Lives Matter protests that are going on across the country right now?
I have been participating in the Black Lives Matter protests. I've brought my wife and my son, and I've been really honored and privileged to be there with them. We have communities that are screaming in pain, justified pain, as they watch their brothers and sisters like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Rayshard Brooks be murdered in front of their eyes over and over and over again with impunity. This is not new to the Black community. It has been going on for decades. It just hasn't been videotaped the way it is now. And so their cries has to be our crime as a white man, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will never know what it's like to fear the police, but I can be an ally, and I can use the privilege that I have and the voice that I have to support their demands for justice. And, you know, folks in the streets aren't asking for better training programs for prosecutors. They're not asking for, their state attorney to get along better with elected officials. They're literally crying for the system to take its knee off their necks. And we should listen to them. And they're right.
Okay, Daryl.
Have you always been a Democrat? And if not, when did you change your political party and why?
I have always been a Democrat. When I registered to vote when I was 18, I registered as a Democrat, and I've been a Democrat ever since.
Okay, this is my next question. If elected state attorney, what programs will you spearhead within the state attorney's office?
Well, I guess that gets us back to the original part of making diversion the rule, not the exception. So there are some extraordinary diversion programs around the country that are working. So San Francisco just created a diversion program for parents to keep parents out of the system and home with their kids, so that we're not separating kids from their parents, while also, you know, holding them accountable, and providing them with the tools to no longer need to resort to crime. Second, I would say restorative justice is something that is profoundly needed here in Broward County. Right now, if you are charged with any crime that is that has a victim or is remotely considered violent, you're not eligible for diversion programs. And yet, those are the very people that kind of need that sustained intervention the most, and provides us with the greatest opportunity to actually drive down crime later on down the road. Restorative justice essentially seeks to make victims whole, does it in a therapeutic, collaborative way in which victims are actually given some real justice, in that they're able to confront the people that hurt them, show them how they have been hurt in a way that doesn't happen in our justice system now, and in a way that actually enables the folks that did the harming to feel it and to internalize it, so that they're less likely to do it again in the future. We also know that if we're going to dismantle mass incarceration, we can't just focus on nonviolent crimes. Folks have received sentences 15 years, 25 years, 50 years for stealing a TV out of a house, which is technically a violent crime. It's a burglary. Or taking a chain off somebody's neck. Both are wrong, and folks should be held accountable, but our prison sentences are out of control. We also know that victims, when they're asked, a study was done 4 years ago that found that 70% of victims of violent crime preferred rehabilitation over longer prison sentences, because they know that prison sentences don't actually reduce crime. You just shuffle them into the system, they come out, and there's no rehabilitating that's being done. And so if we actually want to reduce crime, we've got to be really intentional about that.
Okay, yeah, that's good, because it's kind of like putting a drug addict who's been on crack cocaine for years in prison, and not getting them any help while they're there, they're going to come right back out and get right back on drugs again. So just locking people who are on drugs up in jail and, sending them to prison, that's not solving the problem. Civil citations isn't solving the problem. It's just overcrowding our jails. So I like that. Okay.
And that is one of those things that is not easy, right? And so like, we don't have the infrastructure now in Broward County for those programs. And that is not something the state attorney can do alone, right? Like, I can't just go in and say, okay, I've got a program now. We need investment from the Broward County Commission, from our city commissions around the county, to provide, and most importantly, from the people actually in the county, the experts in the county, to run these things, so that we have both the resources and the expertise to build them up. But right now, we don't have anybody that's trying to even get that done, to try to spearhead those types of programs that will actually, reduce crime in the long run.
Thank you. Mike?
Do you think the state attorney should be a more vocal leader in the community? I always see Dade County Prosecutor Catherine Fernandez-Rundle on TV. She's involved in, like, when shootings happen within the community. Sometimes I see her out. Would you be a more vocal, visible state attorney?
I do. I think the community needs to know who their state attorney is, first of all. And it's particularly important for transparency. So like, all of us that are in this race are making all kinds of, are putting out our platforms. And it'll be up to the people to hold us accountable. But folks can't hold us accountable if we're not in the community, speaking with them, talking with them, hearing their concerns, hearing what their problem, what their issues with the criminal legal system are. I spend a lot of time reading about the best practices around the country, but I am certainly no expert in what's going on in particular neighborhoods in Pompano Beach or Hollywood or Fort Lauderdale or, name your city. And unless the state attorney is in the community actually talking with folks, he or she it's impossible for them to actually address the individual needs of the different communities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would you ask the Attorney General to appoint an independent prosecutor in all officer-involved shootings? Because I know in the past, sometimes the prosecutors here in Broward County, does that, and some perceive that as a conflict of interest, being that the police officers usually work with the prosecutors in cases. Would you be willing to appoint someone from the state attorney general's office if a police was involved in a shooting, officer-involved shooting?
So yes to the independent prosecutor, no to somebody from the attorney general's office. I don't think folks in the attorney general's office are free of those same conflicts of interest. What we need is somebody who is either a former public defender or a civil rights lawyer who has a long history of challenging police abuses and misconduct in court, who isn't afraid to be the dog that we need to prosecute these cases, viciously. And so not only am I willing to do that, that is up on our website, that's part of our platform, because you're exactly right. The conflicts of interest between police agencies and individual police officers and a prosecutor's office are too much for the community to justifiably feel like fairness has been done. So I can be the most aggressive prosecutor in the world against bad police officers, but I still need police officers to testify in other cases. And so to actually be fair, but then also make sure the community knows that we're being fair, I think it's imperative to hire those independent prosecutors.
Okay, and what standards would your office use to determine to prosecute a police officer who engages in misconduct?
Most of that would be done by the independent prosecutor, right? That's the vision. But I'll say this. It would be the same standards that I would use to make the decision of anybody else. And I say that because that is not the way that police cases are handled here in Broward or in anywhere else. And you can look at the George Floyd situation as a perfect example. That man was murdered by 4 police officers on video. And it was still weeks before charging decision was made. Here in Broward County, we had the Fort Lauderdale police officer during one of the first protests who grabbed the young woman who was kneeling on the ground, threw her down, caught on video for the entire community to see, and yet it took days before that officer was charged. If those folks had just been civilians who had done those same exact actions on TV, they would have been arrested that day. They would have been charged that day. And that's what I'm committed to doing. So if I had been the state attorney on a case like George Floyd, the second I saw that video, I would have sought an arrest warrant for those officers, and so that they were behind bars immediately. We have to end what's called the specialized use of grand juries. So right now, the state attorney's office takes many police cases to a grand jury. In cases where they wouldn't take those cases to a grand jury for civilians, they would just file the charge themselves. And then because grand jury proceedings are secret, the community doesn't know what happens in there. And more often than not, the grand jury decides not to find a true bill, file charges against the person, the officer. But we have no idea what was presented to them by the state attorney. And I think that's really profoundly wrong. And so we're committed to ending that specialized use.
And that's one reason why a lot of Black people, don't have faith in the jury system, either the jury system or the justice system, like you just said, because of those secret grand juries. And we've seen those secret grand juries, especially in Ferguson, Missouri, during the Michael Brown, Darren Wilson, when Michael Brown was killed by Officer Darren Wilson. We saw those secret grand juries come into play, and that's why a lot of Black people don't have faith in the justice system today.
And you're exactly right. The Ferguson case was the perfect example of it. But it happens here in Broward all the time. Mike Satz has charged 1 police officer since 1980 with an on-duty involved shooting. And he lost that case.
That was right in Deerfield.
Yeah. And he takes all of those cases to the grand jury, and the grand jury miraculously has found a no bill on all of them. And because they're secret, we don't know why, or what was actually presented to them, and that's a real problem.
Yes, because I think that's the case you might be referring to. We had a police officer here, maybe at least 40 years ago. I think this shooting happened April 3rd, 1980. And the officer's name was Douglas Williams. And I think he might have been convicted the first time, and I believe the case was overturned. And the second trial, he was acquitted. And he went on to be a police officer in Coral Springs and ended up retiring from there. And I just don't think that's right. And one more question. Do you believe in a database for bad police officers in the state of Florida?
Yes. Frankly, it should be nationally.
National.
But somebody that is fired from one agency for misconduct should not be able to just go across the city line and get a job in the next city over, the next county over. But from that is not necessarily something that's within the state attorney's office purview. But what we do need in the state attorney's office is a list of cops who have lied, who have been found to have lied under oath. And we see district attorneys and state, and then release that to the public. And we've seen district attorneys, very, very brave district attorneys and state attorneys across the country that are just starting to release those lists, because judges find police officers to be lying all the time. Internal affairs divisions find police officers to be lying. And yet the community never knows about it. Defense lawyers never know about it. And the state attorney's office keeps calling those same officers as witnesses in their cases. They've actually coined a phrase for it. It's called testifying. And so what we've committed to doing is finding all of those officers that judges or IA divisions have found to have lied, creating a list of those officers, publishing that list, and then informing those agencies that our office will no longer be calling them as witnesses in criminal cases, so you better take them off the streets.
Okay, and I got one final question, and that'll be it for me. Just opinion. Do you think President Donald Trump is a racist?
Yes. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh because it's really not funny. But yes, I mean, he's a profound racist. You look at the things he tweets, the things he says, the calling things, with the Charlottesville thing, saying there were good people on both sides, calling protesters racially charged words like thugs. I mean, there's a reason that David Duke is his biggest fan.
Okay, thank you. Daryl?
I have one final question for you. In this upcoming election on August the 18th, the Black and brown vote is going to be critical for you in winning this election at the state attorney's office. So my question to you, sir, is why should the African American and brown community vote for you?
Yeah. Because it is long past time to dismantle white supremacy. White supremacy is very, very much real. White privilege is real. As a white man, I have benefited from that privilege. I have worked very, very hard. I grew up poor. I've worked very, very hard to get where I am, but I know that I have been assisted by the privilege that comes with my white skin. And so the best thing that I can do is to use that privilege to dismantle white supremacy so that my kids don't have to go through that. And I've been doing that for the last 6 years as like I said, a criminal defense lawyer who only represents folks who can't afford a lawyer. I'm in the trenches every single day using my law degree to fight for families who have been marginalized, who white supremacy has devastated. And then finally, my wife is a Jamaican immigrant. She is one of the, I think, 0.4% of law partners who are Black women. We have two beautiful, amazing children together who one day are going to be teenagers. And I am scared to death to wake up 10 years from now and my oldest is a teenager and we're still living in this racist, terrible, violent criminal legal system that we have today. And I'm going to do everything in my power to dismantle that so that my son doesn't have to live through that.
And that's what we want to hear. We want to hear people say, I'm going to do everything in my power to change the status quo that's been going on for so long. And we want change. And, that's what we want to hear these candidates say. I'm going to change it, straight out, I'm going to change it. So I like that. And you have the floor right now. Tell the people of Broward County and the voters who are going to be voting on August the 18th why we should elect you as the next state attorney in Broward County, Florida.
Sure. There are 10 people running in this race, 8 Democrats, which is a really, really good thing for voters. It means that you don't have to settle. You have the opportunity to pick exactly the type of leader that you want to drive, to shape what the criminal justice system looks like moving forward. I was the first person to get in this race. I got in March of 2019, back when we still thought Mike Satz was going to run again, and have been driving the conversation since then. We were the first campaign to bring up the need to end cash bail. I'm still the only candidate who has pledged to end all cash bail on day one. We're the only campaign talking about the need to decriminalize possession of other drugs. We're only candidate to pledge to end all cash bail. Again, like we said earlier, the only campaign to refuse to meet with police unions, because this moment that we are in right now demands a systemic dismantling of the system, not nibble around the edges change. And I think you asked me about my education earlier. I also have a minor in history. And I think a lot about kind of the conversations that were happening in the lead up to the Civil War in 1850. And much of the debate that was going on in the discourse was not about ending slavery. Abolitionists were seen as kind of fringe, nobody listened to them type folks. The debate was, should we extend slavery into the free states? Should we allow slave catchers to go into free states and bring folks back that have escaped slavery? That was much of the debate. It was kind of brave folks on the ground, both black and white, that made abolition happen, because you don't reform a broken system. You take it apart and build something new. And I think that's where we are right now. A lot of folks talk about criminal justice reform. I don't think that we should think about it as reforming a broken system, but as dismantling the whole thing, because it's profoundly immoral, and we need to build something new. And that's what our campaign has been about from the very beginning, and that's what we'll do as your state attorney.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it from Joe Kimok. He's running for the top cop in Broward County, state attorney in Broward County, Florida. And he'll be on the ballot on August the 18th. And thank you so very much for stopping by the Adams Brothers podcast. And if you win the election, please come back by and see us. Don't be a stranger.
Absolutely.
That's right. Come back.
We want
You
everybody
got
to
it.
come back.
I tell you what, let's do it again in between August and November, and then we'll do it after we've been in for a few months in post-January.
That's a promise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Joe Kimok, thank you for coming by the Adams Brothers Podcast. Good luck to you, sir, and thank you for coming by. And we'll be seeing you in the future. And have a good evening, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a privilege.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Have a good evening.